Welcome to the Simple Questions Podcast. This is your host, Dylan Carnahan. You will learn in this episode the competitions memory champions participate in, strategies memory competitors use, and ways you can improve your memory. Our guest is a highly sought-after memory consultant who works with people from all across the world. The current world record holder for memorizing a little over 9 decks of cards within 30 minutes, memorizing 907 digits within 30 minutes, and memorizing 235 names in just 15 minutes. The founder of the nonprofit organization Climb for Memory, which raises awareness and funds for Alzheimer's research through climbing expeditions, and is a 5-time USA memory champion. I introduce to you Nelson Dellis. I am 8 years old, sitting down for Thanksgiving dinner, when I hear someone exclaim, "Oh, this is disgusting. What is this?" And I look over, and I see my grandma had taken someone else's glass of wine and taken a sip. Several minutes passed, and then I hear, "Oh my goodness, what is this? This is disgusting." And again, she had taken a sip of wine and had forgotten and exclaimed how this was gross. And the third time it happened, it was not very funny. So at 8 years old, this is kind of my first exposure to one extreme of memory and lack thereof. It wouldn't be until a decade or more later till I read the book Moonwalking with Einstein, which introduced me to the world of memory competitions, the other extreme on this spectrum. So that was kind of my first experience to kind of experiences of the world of memory. Nelson, can you talk about what was the catalyst for you to focus on memory?
Yeah, something quite similar, actually. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, and I can remember very distinctly as well something like the story you told. I wasn't 8 years old. I was quite a bit older, in my early 20s, but we were visiting her. She lived in France. My parents are side of the family's French, and yeah, we were sitting down in her little apartment with my granddad in a small French village and having our dinner. And she's right next to me and asking my grandfather where I was, even though I was right next to her,
Yeah.
right? Among other things that kind of showed her memory lapsing, but that one kind of hit very hard. Like, I just was not fascinated. I mean, it wasn't exciting or happy or positive or anything, but I just couldn't fathom. Like, I really was out of my body thinking, what is happening to this person's brain to say that, right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, that was kind of, I started that thought of like what is going on in the brain made me read a bunch of memory books, and I discovered memory championships, and it kind of led the way.
Yeah. So you get this exposure, you start reading up on these things. Now it's one thing to get intrigued by the concept of a memory competition. It's a whole nother to be an active participant. And I'd say that you're even more so than an active participant. So can you explain a little bit more about what these memory competitions are and what the contestants must do to perform in them?
Yeah, so it's been around. A memory championship has been around for it's like 25 years, 30 years ago was the first one. And there's a world championships, there's a UK championships, there's a US championship, and I think they all started from the same place. The US has kind of done its own thing, made it a little more TV friendly, as Americans like to do, but it's essentially the same thing, which is, you memorize for a certain amount of time, and then you have to recall as best as you can that information. And these memory championships are memorizing cards, memorizing numbers, memorizing names, memorizing poems, lists of words, things like that.
Yeah, and can you give a little bit of an idea of kind of the constraints placed around that? I know that you have certain time limits as well as a lot of information that you you must ingest during that time as well.
Yeah, so to give you an idea of some of the specifics here, memorizing a deck of cards, you get 5 minutes, which people can do it in 30 seconds. So if you can do it before the 5 minutes, you can stop the timer. And that's 52 cards. You got to remember the order forwards and backwards. You have 5 minutes to memorize as much of a large number as you can. Uh, what else? It's either like really quick, like cards, like under a minute, or you have like a 5 minute memorization period for some other things like numbers, or you have longer ones like 15 minutes. That's what they time you for names and poetry, and usually it's a bigger set of data for those ones.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there's a time to memorize, and then there's a time to recall. That's kind of typically how it works.
Yeah. And so, if I'm not mistaken, you also have to qualify, right, to kind of proceed and progress to get to kind of a championship, right? So
Mhm.
there's also a competitive aspect as well.
Yeah, it's changed format over the years, but in recent years there is a online qualifying event, and then the top performers there get to go to this finals. But it used to be when I was well, in the earlier part of my competitive career, the qualifiers was like in person the same day as the finals. So people in the afternoon who qualified would do the on stage finals that same day.
Now, I want to take a step back and kind of look at obviously to be a competitor and to be this involved, you have to have some understanding of memory to an extent. So, could you give to a complete layman some just general information about how memory works?
Yeah, I mean, you actually don't need to know much about memory, other than how the techniques work. Um, I could have a neuroscientist besides me and tell me what I'm actually doing with my neurons, and I would be like, "Oh, interesting. I didn't know that." But technically, we're taking advantage of things that our brains have been proven to do time and time again, be good at, which is to remember pictures, and pictures implies that it's something that is meaningful to you, associative to something meaningful to you, and that we remember spatial information really well. So, you know, think of like your childhood home. You could probably recreate most of it in your mind without much effort or having to truly memorize it. It's kind of there probably. We just remember that kind of stuff very well. So those things together, employed into one of the most powerful memory techniques, can allow us to do these seemingly phenomenal feats of memory.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, right? If you had someone break down, here's all this scientific terminology and all these things, um, that's fine and all, but you know, at the end of the day, you're doing whatever that is, even though that's kind of an added dimension of commentary, right, to an extent.
Yeah.
So, in talking about kind of those strategies, what are some strategies that you employ um, regarding memory?
Yeah. So a lot of the information in these championships are list based, meaning there is some order to it. And it's the sequence based, let's say. So memorizing a deck of cards, order matters. And the way you're recalling the deck is you got to put it in order, um, suit value and everything. Same with the numbers. It's a number from start to finish, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same with the poem, same with the list of words. Names, not so much. This is quite a variation on that because they shuffle the faces. So the order doesn't matter. It just matters if you can name the right name to the right face, right? But anyways, in general, a lot of the information that can be randomized to test people on their memory is in this format. And so the memory palace technique is the technique that most of us use at this high level. It's an ancient technique. It's been around for thousands of years. Many different types of documentation of past civilizations using this have been found, and it's just kind of a lost art these days because we don't need to memorize stuff anymore. There's books, there's printing press, there's iPhones, Wikipedia. All that information is at a fingertip uh, tap away. So yeah, and this memory palace technique is using what I just told you, which is coming up with pictures for the things that we're memorizing, really memorable visuals in our mind, and then anchoring them to these mental creations of familiar places. Not palaces. We don't really have palaces anymore, I guess, unless
Yeah.
you're a billionaire, but or royalty, but maybe your apartment or your house, a childhood home, the gym you go to, your high school, all of these places that you go through every single day and know the routes through it, you can use as a way to organize the order of a sequence of images.
Yeah. And so once you kind of have this mental model, if you will, um, there, if I'm not mistaken, there is an element of kind of some work you've done to place things in there using like a POA method. So there's kind
Oh,
of
yes.
an onboarding, if you will, to then additionally, I guess, leverage that strategy for more information.
Yeah, so that really what you're trying to do there, what you're talking about is that first part, which is coming up with a picture for the information and finding the best way to kind of compress the data into as few images as possible. So let's take a sequence of numbers, for example. If you were to just look at each separate digit and try to turn each digit into its own picture, maybe the number looks like something like an eight looks like a snowman, so you picture a snowman. A one looks like a stick, so you picture a stick being whacked against the snowman or something. That's fine, and that works. But then if you have like a 10-digit number, which isn't that big, you have 10 different images you got to remember the sequence of, right?
Yeah.
So then memory athletes are always trying to find out ways to compress that data so that we don't need as many images. So the PAO is person action object is a way to turn numbers into one image for there are variations of this, but 6 digits. And you can even grow it to 7 or 8. Some people even do 9 digits for one image. And then, you can think of a multiple of nine, whatever digits, divided by nine, and that's how many images you have, significantly cuts down on how many locations you have to use in your memory palace and how much further you can span with few images. Um, yeah.
So I think that was a really good way to put it. That's the compression, right? To kind of maximize the space that you can utilize within this memory palace.
Yeah. Yeah, another example with cards, for example, there's 52 cards. So if you had one image per card, you would need a memory palace that had 52 places, one place you'd place one image. But then people got smart and they were like, well, if I have maybe 2 cards per image or per location, that's 26 places I need. Okay, I just halved it. And then 3 cards per location, now you have 17 plus a leftover card. So that's easy, right? 17 places, like in walking through your house, it's not that hard to zip through. So yeah, it boils down to us always trying to find the best strategy to make something memorable and to keep it as compressed as possible.
So you
And
bring
there's
up,
and there's like a trade-off too, because you might think like, well, why don't I just like compress 5 or 7 cards or something,
yeah.
but the problem is trying to there's like a sweet spot because if I'm trying to compress this data and it's taking longer to figure that out, what that looks like, 7 cards together, then I'm not really saving time and maybe even making it more complex. So usually it boils down to compressing 2, 3 to 4 things into one and no more than that really, because then you're just memorizing a sub list within a list kind of thing.
Yeah, so that's especially the competition, right? If you're taking so long to form these images and then subsequently taking long to like decode them, that
Yeah,
can be not
exactly. That's
beneficial.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a fine line. Like, for a while I was like, oh, I gotta come up with a more robust number system. It took me months to learn, and it's very sizable in something that I had to actually ingrain into my procedural memory so that it's just like muscle memory. Um, and I still have to upkeep it sometimes because it's so vast. When I could have probably done a simpler system, just trained that harder, and would have been faster potentially. So Yeah, these are the things that memory athletes are concerned with. I don't think it really matters for the day-to-day person, but at a highly competitive level, it matters.
When something I'm curious about with these images, it seems like the more zanier the image, the easier it is to recall.
Yep, yep. And that's part of it too. So you want your images that you create to be novel, um, over the top, tapping into these kind of shocking senses, things that are outlandishly funny, overly sexual, grotesque, even. Those are things that we just naturally uh, are drawn to, like a moth to a flame.
Yeah. And then you leverage that, right? And you leverage
Yeah,
that within your system, and then you can turn
yeah,
that into a strength.
yeah, exactly. So sometimes my images are pretty tasteless, and potentially not PC for the times we live in, but it happens up here. Nobody needs to know about it, and it helps me remember. So I don't give it too much thought. I just do it and allow it in.
There you go. So you you've talked a little bit, you've alluded to kind of some of the preparation that you'd have to do to compete or just some of the maintenance. Can you elaborate on that a little bit further?
Yeah, so it's a skill, and yeah, the technique works. Like I could walk anybody through an example and they could do it and impress themselves, but it's also something that you could further master and get faster at, right? So, you sit anybody down at a piano, and you could teach them simple song, and how to move their fingers along the keys. But obviously, if you spend years training and training, learning how to sight read and practice your scales, like you could become a pretty good, if not virtuoso, in playing piano, right? And that's practice, right? Obviously, there's skill involved, like natural skill too. Some people just have it and it clicks better. But in general, we can all learn to be better at a skill if we practice it with the right technique and feedback. And memory is no different. So, I really wanted to win this competition. I loved doing it. I was hooked on it and loved the idea of improving my memory through practice. And so I spent many hours, not anymore, but back in the day, just training and training and training, until it became automatic.
I'm curious, Nelson, when do you find yourself using strategies in your personal life? And if so, what are they?
Yeah. You know, Originally I just wanted to compete. I wasn't like, oh, I have a terrible memory in my life. I need to improve that. I mean, I probably didn't have a great memory. It didn't really matter to me. I wanted to win this competition and have the best memory in the US, according to this website, that was promoting a championship. But very quickly after training so hard, I realized that it, of course, permeates into my life, these abilities, and not so much that like I memorize or remember everything. People often just assume that I'm now a tape recorder or something like that. It's not like that. I still have to make the effort to memorize something or remember something, but I have the tools to do it much easier. And I think by now, after all this training, I've kind of rewired how I process information. And I think that's the biggest difference is the way I hear information, see information, uh, whatever my mind is perceiving, kind of goes through this different lens now, which can easily go down an avenue to be memorized. Do you think there's like this memorization factory in my mind, like, and this conveyor belt of information going through, like it's in the right form, right, to be processed by that factory, much easier than say the untrained person.
Yeah, can you elaborate on kind of how you're processing things that enable you to better commit to memory?
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as, my mind is automatically, instead of just seeing it as or hearing it, whatever way, what form it's in, it's beyond that. It's things come in as kind of all the senses as one, if that makes sense. I don't know how else to describe it. It's kind of hard to put my finger on it, but let's say you're reading something on a page, they're just a collection of words, right? And some people might read something like that and have a hard time like actually imagining what this is being said. They may not even take the time to do that. They're just reading it for the meaning, right?
Hmm.
Whereas when I read it, almost by default now, like it comes in as this like enriched world where obviously it's not real. I'm not actually there touching it, having a psychedelic experience or anything like that. But it's in my head. It's very visual. It's probably as close as it could be without being real in my head, you know? I can taste it, I can touch it, I can feel it, I can sense it, like what it feels emotionally. Um, and that's I think that's the key to memorizing anything is having information in that way. Um, and yeah, whether it's a name, a number, an address, a set of instructions, like that is constantly happening for me. Um, and it just makes my world for memorization a lot more colorful and enriched.
That was a really interesting way to articulate things. So what I heard there is that you've when you hear things, you tie a lot more senses to them, and emotions, which then makes it easier to recall rather than, someone idly studying, right? Where you're just, looking at the page and just, maybe you have an internal monologue going, right? So you've kind of
Yeah.
tied a lot more to that bit of information than, say, a normal person just on first glance reading something.
Yeah. Yeah. And you could even maybe go as far to say that like it's a creativity skill that I've really mastered here because, when I'm looking at this dry, esoteric textbook chapter of, stuff that I'm studying that is boring me to tears, like it is my creativity is like bringing it alive, right? And it may not even be stuff that is like the actual text, right? It might just be
Yeah.
stuff that it sounds like or reminds me of, or in a sillier way, right? In a bizarre way, but it's memorable, right? Like I might read maybe I'm studying like biology terms or something, and or medicine, and it's like a really complicated medical term. I may not know what it means, but maybe I read the word and it sounds like something, you know, pornographic or like humorous, right? And that's what I'm envisioning in massive 4D, in my mind. And then I read the meaning, and then that has its own color to it too, and then they kind of like start to come together and overlap, and yeah, it just is naturally kind of doing that. And when I'm more conscious of that and applying a little bit more of the other memory techniques, like that's when it can really catch fire and stick in the way that I want it to. But that little step is the conscious effort that I have to make.
Yeah, so the conscious effort is the ingestion of it and then employing the strategies on top of that.
Yeah. Or the intent, right? For it to be memorized kind of thing. Yeah.
No, yeah, that's very interesting. I appreciate you sharing that perspective because that is different. I think
Yeah.
not everyone operates in
Yeah.
that way, so I think sharing that can give people insight. So we talked a little bit about kind of the strategies and I guess some like frankly the mindset really that comes with that. What habits did you find yourself adopting to kind of get an edge or improve your memory?
Um, yeah, I at the time that I discovered this stuff, and started training on my own. I had always been interested in really kind of weird esoteric things, but I wouldn't really stick with it. I jumped from the next exciting thing to the next. And this was one of those exciting things, but for whatever reason, maybe it was inspiration from watching my grandmother pass. But this one stuck. And yeah, it really taught me how to be dedicated to something and to put in a little bit of training every day, even if it wasn't like massive amounts of time, just being consistent. Um, and then seeing the results, right? I was able to win these championships and break records. That was really reaffirming, you know, all the efforts that I put myself through. And so that was a big learning lesson in my 20s to my older self, like I actually went through something and achieved it. And it helped me kind of be a little more dedicated to projects and, work that I'm doing. So that was a big learning experience for my training.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. You know, when you get positive outcomes, it tends to incentivize you to continue to do that thing, right? So those early
Yeah.
victories, the small wins, are just throwing all the buzzwords out there. You know, those can have a good impact on the kind of emotional aspect and drive you to continue to pursue something, right?
Yeah. But it was, obviously the championship itself was a big, win. It was an actual win. Um, but I think that was always a nice potential goal to have before I won anything. I wanted that, but I must have been seeing daily wins for myself on a minute level, in terms of me being hooked on this feeling that memory techniques gave me. Like it made me feel like a superhuman to myself, daily, which was, I think, a win enough. And Yeah, obviously that doesn't necessarily happen with everything that you put in a little bit of effort to. But I mean, it did for this, and that was a learning experience.
Yeah. I I want to get to something that's a little bit different. So I'm going to ask you
Okay.
something a little bit different here. So there may be some people listening that have what's called aphantasia, which is
Yes.
a neurological condition where um, it is not easy or not possible to conjure images in the mind's eye. So it's a
Yeah.
unique kind of situation. And I'm
Do you have that,
curious.
by the way?
No, but I have people that I'm related to that have that. So that's kind of where that
Interesting. Okay.
it came from. Um, and so for people, members of the aphantasia community, what strategies could they use that don't involve visualization for memory?
Yeah. So I know a few people with aphantasia. I've trained a few people with varying degrees. This is what I understand from my experience of working with people with aphantasia is that, you know, the statement "I can't create images" is I don't know if that's specific enough because this is what I'm going to tell you. So when I teach memory techniques, I talk about this creating visuals, and when I coach people, I do examples and I suggest, hey, for this, maybe picture, you know, and I go into all the details, like what are you feeling? What are the colors, right? And most people can do this, right? Let's say people who don't have aphantasia at all. Um, but even that, like, if I really stop to think about it, I don't really know what people are doing when they're doing that, right? If I say picture, an ocean, okay. We're definitely my visual right now versus yours, if you did that, is not the same, right? Like I'm sure there's water involved and probably maybe a beach or a boat or something, but water for sure, right? But what are we picturing here? Like, are you staring at the water? Are you like looking at the undulating waves? Like, is it far out? Is it zoomed in? Like, are you looking at droplets of water? Is it the feeling of the waves in the ocean? Like it's really hard to describe that. Okay. What I found through training, my memory, let's take cards, for example. All right. I couldn't do this at first. And then my first deck of cards took 20 minutes, which I thought was amazing at the time. And I took my time. Each card I'd look at and like really try to imagine as much detail as I could in my image. And then as I try to chip down on the time, now I can do it in 30 seconds. Okay. So you think like, what I obviously can't, two things that probably happened. I got faster at coming up with my pictures, but I also probably had to lose some of the detail, right? I can't sit there for each card and think, what does it smell like? What does it look like? Right. At some point, look, if I'm doing 30 seconds for a deck of cards, that's less than a second per card, right? So there's really not much time to formulate much of an image. And this is what the feeling happens when you get good at memorizing is you almost feel like you're not really picturing anything at all. Okay, which is bizarre to say because I'm teaching people to think of pictures, right? It really comes down to like a feeling, which is a bizarre thing to say because some of the fastest times I've ever memorized stuff, I often walk away thinking like, I don't really know what I just did. I just know the information and the images are there, right? And that's wild to me. But it I think it's a helpful thing to talk about because for people with aphantasia, the end goal doesn't have to do with images in reality, right? It's really just a feeling about things. Um, but to learn how to get there, unfortunately, it's taught through sitting with the visuals, right? Um, but anyway, so what I'm trying to get to is with the spectrum of people who of aphantasia um, abilities or disabilities,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, I think we all can derive some context to the information, right? Whether it's through some meaning that you know, like if I said to someone with aphantasia, say, picture an orange, okay, they may not be able to up with the thought of an orange round thing in their head, but
Yeah.
they probably know that it is an orange round thing, right?
Yeah. Through word association. May not have a visual cue, but
Right. And what does that mean, right? So, and again, I don't want to speak for people who have severe aphantasia. I don't know how deep the rabbit hole goes. But I would bet that they can probably have a sensation of sometime or something associated to a time they ate an orange or where an orange is. There's always some kind of angle, I think, that can be made to make a visual, whatever you want to call this thing, which isn't actually a visual, right? Using some
yeah.
picture in your mind. It's kind of a misnomer. But I think it's a fascinating thing. I don't want to claim that I have the solution, but I definitely think anybody who comes to me who says they have aphantasia, I think I can work with that and still teach them these techniques. Um, so anybody out there who feels that way, and it's maybe thinking, oh, memory techniques, I can't do it. I disagree. Reach out to me because I'm fascinated by it and I want to work more in that field because I think there is work there that can be done. So,
Yeah. Well said. I appreciate you saying that and extending that, as well as I think, again, that kind of highlights kind of that we used the term earlier, like creation, but like the abstraction of this all and how, like you said, there's maybe a different angle, right? Word association, things like that, just something that you can kind of hold on to despite maybe not having that visual element.
yeah, yeah. Listen, and this gets even further out there, like to extend beyond the feeling of of what I was explaining, where I memorized something and I don't know how I did it, or really what I was thinking. I almost feel at this point in time that I don't even know if actual memory formation, like the qualia of those things that come to our mind, is coming from our own brains, if that makes sense. Like this is way more philosophical than anything. But in terms of like consciousness, I feel like our brains, our memory is more like a read write kind of like head of like think of like a tape player,
Yeah.
right? And the tape, the substrate of all the information that is out there, you're just reading it in and writing it in. Um, so it's not necessarily a result of what is in here, but you're just pulling it in and receiving it from something out there. It sounds very woo-woo. It is,
No,
but that is a sensation I have when I perform in these kind of flow states with memory, which is bizarre.
and when you say flow state, you're referring to the fact that you could sit and ingest all this information, memorize it, and then walk away feeling, like you don't really have, like you didn't do that in a way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't happen all the time. I don't want to say that I'm just like I just casually look at stuff and it's like poof there. No, most of the time it's like a very concerted effort. But when I'm like really in it, it's like anybody playing basketball in their flow state, like they all can shoot threes, like they've trained it. But some days it's just like you touch the ball, if the basket hoop looks like an ocean, right? You just throw
Yeah.
it in and it goes in. You just like can't describe why this is happening right now, but it happens, right? So same kind of thing.
How how much training do you think you put in until you first kind of felt that? Can you kind of elaborate on when that happened and kind of what you've seen
Yeah,
that's enabled you to kind of maybe enter that better?
yeah. I mean, it's happened at different stages. Like when I'll go back to the cards at first. I was not able to go under 5 minutes, but eventually I was getting 5, 4, 3 minutes. Some of those times where I've like pushed myself beyond like a perceived barrier, like breaking the 3 minute time to memorize cards. Like I'm sure that first time I did it, I was like, oh man, I didn't, time didn't feel like anything, and I just kind
Yeah.
of like zoomed through it. Um, but then maybe that happened again. I can remember some of these instances where I was like, wow, that felt easier than it had ever before, like for 1 minute and then getting down to 30 seconds. The only reason I explain the 30-second example is because it literally is very fast for the data. So
Yeah.
something is being shortcutted there.
Yeah. I I want to hit upon, we had a little bit of a philosophical discussion, but I want to
Yeah.
kind of tap back into that conceptually here, and we alluded to this earlier, in a world where we have all of this externally stored information, what makes internal memory important?
Yeah. I think, it's in a world, yeah, where everything is just available. You don't need to keep it in your own brain. I think being able to remember something, that feeling of recalling something and knowing that you know something is such a human experience, right? It's like it's self-validating. It feels like your truest self. Something feels good about it, and it feels like you were made to do this, right? As a being. um, so I think in a world where like I feel like more and more with technology, we like disassociate from ourselves and what it means to be a human. I think having a good memory, like the argument for remembering things with this alone, is super powerful, and empowering itself. Obviously, it takes work, and it's the lazier option to just be like, you know what, I don't need to remember this. Like, but I think the argument to memorize something, you gotta feel it again to know what I'm talking about. And it's a very exhilarating feeling to be on top of information in your own head. Um, on the other side of things, it potentially might stave off cognitive diseases as you get older, right? So there's an argument for brain health as well.
Yeah, no, I think those are two compelling arguments, right? There's an emotional satisfaction there. Also, that's like you said, that's a very human thing. You have some additional benefits there as well, and I think too something to point out is you can't always go to externally retrieve information. You don't always have that at your disposal, right? Albeit that may
Yeah.
sound crazy, but there are some circumstances where you can't do that. And I think you also have your own experiences too, uh, which may or may not be shown on a flashback on your photos or something like that on your iPhone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But it's like, I've memorized poems for competition. That's one of the events, but I never really memorized poems like for myself. I love certain poems. I've read poems and like said, like, that's nice. That would be nice to know, like to
Mm-hmm.
be able to recite, but I never do it. But I did last year. I did a poem that just I was kind of bored and at the same time inspired to do it for one reason or another. And I came away from it just being like, wow, like that experience of being able to recite it, like I felt one with the poem, and it meant so much more to me. And it felt like it was mine, that I put it up here and that I had it there. It was a really cool experience, and I don't know if many people go after that anymore because they don't have to. But if they did, they might surprise themselves. You know how exhilarating it might feel.
You've done a very good job articulating kind of that feeling as best you can. I think that's a very important part of this that I've heard from you quite a bit is that, albeit it's difficult to articulate, it's a little abstract, but the emotion that you can put behind kind of this recollection, it's a very human thing and you can very validating, right? Um, I'm curious, um, where you were at the beginning of your journey as well as The people you've worked with, what are some of the biggest challenges that people face initially kind of wanting to get involved with improving their memory?
Yeah, I think especially with older people who have maybe never thought about memory improvement, and then I'm telling them to, you know, get rid of their boundaries, think about the wildest things ever, be creative. Like that can be hard for some people who've thought a certain way their whole life. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's definitely possible to break through there, but that's usually a big hurdle for people. The other hurdle might be that they've just accepted that they have a bad memory their whole life. That's just who they are, and that thought is so self-defeating, especially for memory. So getting over that could be a huge hurdle. But once you start to know and tell yourself that you have a good memory, it's a super powerful thing.
What's the best way for people to learn more about you and the work you do?
Yep. There's a few resources. My website, if you just search Nelson Dellis, just go to nelsondellis.com. All my information is there. You can send me a question. You can hire me to give speeches, workshops. If you want my book, it's on Amazon. Just search my name. I have a kid's book and an adult's book. And then my YouTube channel. I have tons of videos that teach this stuff and do fun examples of it or silly demonstrations. But it's all out there to instruct and teach people and motivate people to maybe consider using their memories more.
Yeah. And we'll make sure that all of that is included in the show notes for this episode. Nelson, thank you for sharing your knowledge and time today.
My pleasure, Dylan.
That wraps up our conversation with Nelson. We talked about how memory techniques can be used by those who have aphantasia, the importance of internal memory, and that memory uses all your senses. Go to this episode's show notes to see any resources Nelson mentioned during our episode. And lastly, subscribe to the Simple Questions podcast to get notified when our latest episodes are released. Thank you for listening, and remember to keep asking questions.